This is Patricia Windrow at the Cable Easel, bringing you a program about painting and drawing. I work from life. I bring all my props into the studio here, and I talk about the problem of transferring the third dimension to the second dimension. So, with that in mind, let me tell you about this composition tonight. It is a composition with almost no variety of color. A very interesting problem. It's also one that I don't find many schools deal with. The reliance upon the use of color is all pervasive, and the business of trying to make something out of almost nothing is the problem. So I have brought in it's called a cocotte. It's a French term for one of these steaming pots. They're quite beautifully made. They're a lovely terracotta color. And along with that, I've got a sort of a terracotta, pale terracotta looking onion, the earth-colored potatoes, and simply the cutting open of the onion for the lighter tones. I think that this kind of composition, which is very demanding but also extremely rewarding once you're able to pull it off, is one of the things that most people who are beginning to learn how to paint ought to try to do. I find that many times the reliance upon, safe subjects such as, flowers and fruits and so on, don't pay attention to the fact that some of these things ought to be perused and investigated. So I'm mixing up some color with a variety of different a base tone of this. I've drawn it beforehand. It is impossible in a half hour to draw anything as complicated as this, so I assume, of course, that the people who are watching and who want to try and work from what I do know how to draw somewhat. It would ordinarily take a great deal of time to draw this, and so I'm just simply going to I drew it first, and I'm going to begin to apply the paint and talk about it as I go along. The application of color is done with a sable brush. It's done deliberately. There is nothing improvisational about it, and I work entirely from looking at my subject matter. I do not invent it. I don't attempt to improvise on it. It is the challenge which comes from being a realist painter and working with props that are there, and I like to pick on props that do not go bad or turn rotten or fade. And so for the most part, this kind of a subject will be good for weeks, actually literally weeks and weeks of being able to sit in a designated place in a studio or in a separate area from your living and children and so forth and so on, and just sit there, and you can go back to it whenever you want to, and the chances are you will not find that it has changed for many, many weeks. Terracotta is probably combined. The combination is white as well as some burnt sienna, yellow ochre, cadmium orange. I find that many times one needs to know about all of these names of colors, and you must also probably be told that I use a palette which involves about 14 colors. As you can see, I'm putting on the pale colors first, and we'll work in the shadow tones and the darker colors later. My palette is just another piece of masonite with the with about 14 colors squeezed onto it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Oh, I've got 15 tonight. And I find that the need to have these various colors is what makes for interesting and very accurate mixing of tones. The mixing of colors is a problem which I find most people are very confused about, and that's why as I'm working I try to tell you what I'm using. It is only fair to impart that kind of knowledge instead of simply saying, well, this is what you use, instead of just dipping into a palette and not telling people what they're using. So now I've got a darker tone going. I have laid this on here, and I'm going to start to put the darker tones on, and then the details come later. The business of working with oils is the rewarding part, because they will blend very nicely. As you can see, when the paint is wet, the colors blend. And so don't be intimidated with oils. However, do not use oils around small children, and if you do have oils around small children, make sure that they are locked up at night and not to be fooled with, because many times they are toxic and should not be fooled. But to say nothing of how they can ruin some perfectly good clothing if children get it onto furniture or clothing. So I find that I really ought to advise people, if they're going to start working in oils, that they should have this kind of thing in mind. So with the two tones that I'm working with, I'm going to simplify this because of the problem of time. I'm going to simplify it, but just to show you how you go about applying the paint on something as complex as this. As you can see, it's already begun to take a bit of shape just with two colors, two tones and blendings. You must pay attention to where the light falls. You have to pay attention to where what the details do when they do it, and the fact that you're working from life means that the details are not a secret. They are there for you to look at and to check out every time you need to. You go back and forth with your eyes to the subject matter to be able to inform yourself of what it is that you're painting. I have found many times people say, I can't work from life, it's too complicated, I get confused. However, that's because one needs to have a mindset that you're going to work from this subject and it is going to be your source of information. It can't help but work. It really can't help but work. I have done it for so long, and I've done it in classroom situations, and I've also found that children find themselves very receptive to the idea of not always working from imagination, but of working from life. And after you have managed to paint for a long time from these subjects, you will find that you remember a great deal about what it is that you learned as you were working from life, and that will simplify your ability to go off into other tangents. Namely, if you do want to do fantasy paintings, you will have the basic information of what things look like and how to handle circles and spheres and squares and shadows and so forth. These little chicks in here don't look like anything until such time as they are delineated as little chicks. But I must emphasize once again that when you are working from life, you will find yourself discovering brand new things about the shapes of things. And there is no question that the great paintings of today and yesterday and so on throughout history have more than likely been from life. I'm not talking about the paintings that you find in churches and religious paintings, except that the paintings of saints and Madonnas and so on were done from live models for the most part. So even anything that may be allegorical or religious has had its roots in some basic information of life figures. All the great painters worked with models. Well, I have the beginning of this rather remarkable looking rooster here. I'm using some purple and some sap green to make the darker color for the details of this wonderful pot. And here they come. I'm going to just show you a little bit how the details the darkness gets put in. They separate. It's all the same value, all the same tones, simply darker. The basic terracotta color was simply made darker with the mixing of the colors that I told you about, the purple and the green. And the slash marks can be interpreted very, very very, very liberally. You're not doing a catalog ad of this chicken. You're doing a painting of it. Hence, you want to have it as painterly as possible. And these details, as you can see, are handled with a certain amount of subtlety, and they don't have to, hit you over the face with them. And sometimes you will find that some of these details can just be eliminated for the sake of the painterly quality. Up here we have a nice dark shadow underneath the beak. And that is very definitely dark against the lighter background, from which this is set, and that immediately gives a feeling of the third dimension. Here are some of these darker tones, and they go up with a slash in the middle. Here we go. Okay, sometimes when I'm working on very small stuff, I have to hold my breath because it's hard to control the brush. I want to talk about toning down. This monotone thing is to be able to introduce people to the business of working with almost no color, because color is very seductive. If you get enough color, you can kind of call just about anything a painting. But if you can't rely on color, you have to rely on other things, namely composition and observation and shadow and form. So when you talk about monotone composition, some of the paintings that I have sold most often are paintings that have very little color but a great deal of expertise and a lot of technique in them. And as you can see, I'm working on these with these wonderful feathers which are in the sculpture of this pot, but they are interpretive. They're very free, and they're not dwelling on too much detail, because what we're interested in is a painting rather than, as I say, a plan for a design. So here comes the head of this little chick, as you can see, is going to suddenly become much more obvious in the detail that is taking place. The shadow has to be looked at. Of course, one has to observe it very carefully, and that's why setting something up for many weeks is a good idea, because whoever is painting professionally may have the time to be able to do it, but an awful lot of people have to fit painting in to their other schedules, and therefore you have to be able to come back to it at given times. So these are all little pieces. You cannot complete a wonderful painting in no time at all. I mean, there are programs on the TV that show you that in a matter of 1 hour you can produce a 20 by 24 painting of the Grand Canyon or of the Great Southwest or the Great West or mountains and so on, and that isn't possible. You have to spend more time than some of these programs tell you about. And I find that it's a disservice to the people to fake it out and tell them that they can produce this in no time at all, which is not so. So I always want to emphasize that go back to it. If it's a landscape, go back to it the next day at the same time. And if it's a still life, find something that's cooperative. Find something that isn't going to go rotten on you in a matter of hours. Flowers are impossible to do that way. However, we talk about flowers on other programs, and there are ways to handle that also. So I'm going to continue with this and try and get as much of this terracotta piece in, so that you can see what happens when I am going to tackle the business of having an onion, which is almost the same color as the terracotta piece, because these pieces are in fact oniony looking, but light and shade takes care of all the dilemmas that you might have about, well, it's an onion color against the pot, how do you handle that? So we'll talk about that. I'll take a little break now and come back to it in just a moment, so don't go away. for the last half of this program of a composition with almost no color. Should be rather interesting, at least it is to me. I hope it is to you. I'm working with this lovely prop, and as you can see, I'm about to zero in on something that doesn't seem to have much color, and that is going to maybe prove to be a problem to people who might be tackling this idea. However, we're dealing with light, and light is a wonderful substance. It seems to play tricks on just about everything that it touches, and so that's why shadow and highlights are what are necessary to solve the problem of monotone color and also forms of color against color that are very, very similar and very close. It happens in portrait painting all the time because shadows on faces are very subtle and very difficult to handle. So I'm going to I'm doing this to in a way talk about the subtleties of colors against colors that need to be attended to and that turn out to be rather complicated sometimes. So I've got the top part of this done, and here's the shadow that comes right on this part because it's overhanging the other one. Very important shadow. It's what gives the third-dimensional quality to any of these paintings. I've got the onion. I'm going to put this big deep shadow here underneath, right next to the onion, and that's going to designate the color that I'm going to be able to use on the side of the onion, which is quite pale. And this shadow is being cast by that onion in two places, on the table or ground and against the bowl. There are slash marks in it. They should be handled with a great deal of subtlety. These slash marks, which are kind of reminiscent of the onion, but they should be just put in with a little bit of subtlety because they are not vital to the composition, but they are nevertheless there. And when they are up here, they turn a little bit darker because, of course, they're in shadow. Something to be considered and something to think about as you're doing it. Now, we have the onion. Remarkable. It's got the same colors in it as the terracotta, only maybe just a little bit less of some. The side of this onion is only slightly more yellow than the terracotta, but it's still very much the same tone. It's got a pinkish glow to it up here, and then it has a little bit of darkness against the background. So it's all very subtle, and it has to be blended carefully. When I'm coming up to the when I come up to the area which is close to the bowl, it doesn't matter if it becomes the same color, because that's the way it is. That's going to give you the third-dimensional quality. There is a lot of brilliant yellowish tone down here. That's too much. Some lovely tones down here that have to be blended quite carefully with the top part, and then of course the fun time comes when you put the highlight in. Now this is becoming quite dim and dark underneath here because it is a sphere. Spheres are really balls, and this just happens to be an onion in the shape of a sphere, and their shadows as they go underneath there are quite intense, as are the tops of them sometimes. But as you come around here, it becomes dark. A touch of green is going to help me to make this, well, let me see. I better be very careful, because if this gets too dark, then I find myself in trouble with the texture of an onion. This is a very pale and lovely, it's champagne colored in a way. If the decorators were here, they'd say that's really quite champagne color. Now, here, there is a wonderful and brilliant reflection coming from the cut part of the onion in my composition, and it's totally mystifying why it would pick up that much light, but it does. And so, when it does, you put it in and be perfectly happy with it because it's there. That's the business of what the light, how the light plays with it. I have here a brilliant highlight because of the fact that we are working in this studio with a tremendous amount of light, but there is the same amount of light on an onion pretty much no matter where you are. It's the texture of the skin which is very, very glassy and picks up all of these highlights. However, in an onion, there is an interesting thing that takes place. there is a little shadow that is going to cut through there, and you'll see that that shadow tells you about the texture of this part of the onion. All to be considered because of the fact that it's light playing against it. Up here it's a little bit darker, and then we have a light area here. Oops, not light enough. Let me get back to that. Light area here, and it becomes almost the same color as the pot behind it. But that's not to be worried about. That's the way it is. It's the mystery of the way the light plays on these two objects. So with this strange-looking, well, sort of nubby, flattened out kind of stem that got messed up in the shipping of this onion, I find that the only thing that tells me what it is the shadow that is cast underneath it. And as you know, I'm always hung up on shadows and find them to be vital to the three-dimensional quality of any painting that I do. Must rely on its shadows. Not enough attention is paid to that when I see classes taking place. There are the shadow doesn't seem to be concentrated on enough by the instructor. So I'm going to keep talking about shadows, and because the realism, the problem of the realist painter is that he's got to make you believe what you're looking at. So we have here some very, very small details about what takes place on this onion are the very pale lines, and those are going to be done with my turpentine soaked brush, and they are to be done quite subtly, certainly almost not at all, but they must be done very subtly. At least one has to be done, and it conforms to the shape. Too harsh. Take it off. It has to come off. And another one up here maybe, and that is too harsh, and that has to come off. So when you, the reason that, as I said a few other times before, the reason that painters' hands are dirty is because they got their hands in paint all the time. Anyway, the business of painting this onion and then the cut onion next to it is part of the enormous interest that I have in showing things that are common, ordinary things, things that you have every day in your life, and things that can make wonderful paintings. This onion is has been cut. It was cut right here in the studio. It's turning a little bit yellow rather quickly. It has a faint touch of green to it because it is turning, but I do not presume to be able to think that I can finish this painting in 1.5 hours time. But what I did want to do was to introduce you to something which is limited in color, which I always find very interesting. I'm sure that maybe with the few moments that we have spent together here, you will find the same kind of interest and tackle the problem. The problems are, this color that I'm putting here is the shadow that is being cast by the other piece of the onion, by the other onion, and I must bring this down here to show that there's the shape of the shadow. And so once again, I'm going to I don't know whether the time is probably running out terribly quickly, and I'm going to find myself really in the midst of doing something interesting. But anyway, let's continue without too much worry about the time. The edge of this onion is almost the same color as the terracotta, as you can see, but it's down here, and the light is hitting it and doing something else again. So there is the beginning of that particular piece. This pointy part that comes up here is in shadow, but it's very clear that this is a piece of the skin. That tells you the anatomy of the onion at the same time. All right, and so then I'm going to start to work down towards the other part of it that is quite bright against it, and it goes in a circle. There is a turn, and it comes down in a lovely sort of a point. Very strange, very interesting how this onion turns into a point down here. And it has, and who would think that a cut onion would have so much going for it? Especially when it falls apart like that and it reveals its wonderful anatomy and its really, really mysterious construction, how everything in there fits into itself. Maybe when you cut onions for the pot roast, you're not going to pay that much attention, but boy, when you sit and paint it, it becomes very revealing, the anatomy of that onion, and to me it's interesting. I hope it is to you. So here we have the onion behind it, and the lightness of that coming up against this one. And as you can well imagine, that if this painting were to be done as a saleable piece, it would probably take maybe very close to a week to do it properly, with the exception of the cut piece, of course. The onion, the cut onion, is going to do bad things very shortly, but for the most part, any good painter would be able to do a composition like this within the space of a week, and if he has any luck at all, he would be able to sell it for maybe $200 or $300, which tells you that painters have to really scrounge to be able to make a living as painters, because $300 a week today is not considered very much. And so do not pity the painter, envy the painter, except don't expect to ever find one that has got tremendous sums of money until they hit the big time. It's just like any other endeavor. When you hit the big time, it's worth it. When you don't, it's a struggle. I'm going to be trying to tackle something as innocuous and as totally colorless as a potato. Now, the potato has some yellow ochre in it, and it also has some white and a touch of black maybe, but it is nevertheless a very pleasant vegetable to paint. It has almost no character unless you put it in an interesting setting. And if you can put this potato in an interesting setting and treat its texture with any kind of expertise at all, I think many people will be totally intrigued with the fact that you may have painted a potato, a gray, almost shapeless thing, and made your audience believe that there in fact is a potato. One of the tricks, of course, is to put that eye in it, which is done by putting a little touch of light, and then its dark place here, and that's the characteristic of the potato. Dumb little things like that which make the difference between, see, there's almost no difference between the color of this one and the other one. And this is the problem. So I hope that talking about these things will interest people. I run into people many times and say, I just don't know how you can find interest enough in doing a painting of a potato. Well, the only answer that I have for that is sit down and try it sometime, and then you'll find out just exactly how complex it is to pull off something that has apparently no shape, no color, no personality, no nothing. Of course, there are red potatoes, and they're vastly different, and they're much more interesting, and they're quite nice to do. But these little ordinary Long Island potatoes, which is what they are, and we're local origination, so that should be of some interest to somebody, that these little props that I'm using came right out of our own neighborhood. And there is at least a potato with its little eye. Well, the shadow being cast by these things is just as plain and ordinary as the potato itself, but you have to put it in there, otherwise they're going to be floating around in space. So I've got the little shadow, and he's got a little sort of a little nub under here, which will tell you that it falls in there somewhere. And the shadow is as important to the lowly potato as it is to the glamorous iris. So here we have the business of trying to arouse interest in my audience in these perfectly common and ordinary subjects, which are the test of your patience and the test of your selectivity as a painter. Well, I'm going to have to leave you now and hope that you were interested enough in my potatoes, onions, and general composition to have watched with intrigue and concentration. Thank you for watching. This is Patricia Windrow at the Cable Easel on the Cable Vision Channel 6. Tune in again whenever you see it announced. I'll be happy to do what I can to inform you and arouse your interest in painting from life. Bye-bye.